I'll hand over to the panel now, if that's okay. So Richard, can I start with you just to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yes, thanks, Bethan. Morning, everybody, or afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Harris. I'm an audit director with Audit Wales, and I've recently taken over the responsibility for Town and Community Councils from Anthony Barrett.
Lovely, thanks, Richard. Deryck, I'll come to you next.
Hi, I'm Deryck Evans. I'm the audit manager responsible for looking after the audit arrangements for town and community councils across Wales, and I've been heavily involved in preparing the new arrangements.
Great, thanks, Deryck. And Paul, I'll come to you, please.
I'm Paul Egan, Deputy Chief Executive Officer for One Voice Wales. I'm here today to identify what support One Voice Wales can provide councils as we move into this different type of audit arrangement.
Lovely, thank you all. So let's get started with the questions then. You'll notice today we've got some set questions for the panel, which have been detailed in your joining instructions. But as I said already, please do send your questions in as soon as you can so we can answer as many as possible today. So Richard, I'll come to you first. So why have changes been made to audit arrangements for community and town councils?
Thank you, Bethan. I thought I'd give a bit of background to some of this because it's probably a key question that we need to answer today before we start thinking about what the actual changes are all about. And a bit of background, we're all aware there's a statutory requirement for town community councils to produce accounts and the Auditor General to actually audit those accounts. We've had a process in place now since 2001 in terms of limited assurance process, although this was modified slightly in 2015. And this was being performed by some of the audit firms on behalf of the Auditor General. I think over the last few years now, we've been noticing a body of evidence that some of these arrangements probably aren't quite working and potentially aren't quite fit for purpose in terms of the Auditor General discharging his duties in terms of providing that opinion on those town councils. And that's from the annual reports that we produce, the work we do with individual town and community councils, and also some of the national studies like internal audit, which have flagged up some of the concerns we've had. I think in terms of the annual reports, I think we've produced it for the last 7 years now, and that's trying to summarise some of the findings that we identified from the local work and the work that is sort of passed our way by some of the firms. There's a wide range of issues that have been flagged up in those reports, and I think if you look at the consultation document, we've highlighted those concerns. We've also put the links to those reports if you're not familiar with those as well. And these do reoccur, and I think one of the issues we did find, a lot of the issues we identified went back over a number of years. And I think that was where we're trying to start pick out whether the actual approach itself was working, given the age and some of the timeframes behind some of these. Because what tends to happen in practice, where there are a few concerns and issues, those audits are passed to Audit Wales to undertake the more detailed work. And there's been some significant failures probably in some of those audit bodies. And again, come back to the consultation, that ranges from sort of lack of information, lack of accounting records, poor controls, failure to comply with own standing orders. So a lot of those things came to the fore as part of that work we were doing, and ultimately resulted in something that lost to the public purse, which is, this is public money. We're going to make sure that doesn't occur. So we've been looking at the approach itself. The approach itself is probably based on using internal audit. A good internal audit function allows us to step back and provide more of a light touch process. But I think even the work we've done in looking at them in 2019 in terms of the internal functions across Wales, there's some issues there in terms of some of the way the work was being performed, and also perhaps a lack of internal audit in some of the town and community councils. So I think taken together, all these things have undermined what we've been doing in terms of the limited assurance process. So obviously we've consulted on a new approach, set out some of the key thoughts and thinking behind what we're trying to do. And again, we touch on that today. But is to make sure we can discharge our duties both as town and community council clerks and councils, but also as Audit Wales as well, and the Auditor General. So that was a lot of thinking behind it. And again, that set up probably some of the work that we'll touch on later in this session this morning. Thanks, Bethan.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. So we've just had a question coming in response to that. So the WA only issued about 20 reports. This is only 3% of all councils. So why not just focus additional work on those councils? So I'm not sure who wants to come in on that one.
I'm happy to start.
Richard, do you want to follow up? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Then Deryck can probably come in a bit more detail if needed. Really, it's a really good question, and it's something we did grapple with. I think there's been 20 reports up to 2018. I think there's a lot of work still ongoing with some town and community councils at the moment, which might result in more reports. Now we're going through the process at the moment. But I think what was quite clear from those reports themselves was some of the issues are quite widespread and have been sort of flagged up in some of the other work we're doing. So I think because we have focused a lot of time and effort into those audits and the public interest reports, that's quite reactive work. I think what we're trying to do is try and be a bit more proactive in making sure some of the things that have been there for a long time, of a number of years, are addressed sooner across the board and provide more assurance to the community councils and the wider public. So I think we have looked at the areas where we've had the issues. I think there will be more reports coming, unfortunately. We want to try and avoid that in the future by being more proactive in the audit regime. I'm not sure if Deryck wants to add any more to that.
Yes, thanks, Richard. What we find when we look at councils in more detail, we often find that the issues that are cropping up have been ongoing for a number of years. So our current audit arrangements are not that effective at picking up issues at an early stage. So the kind of thing that we're looking to do is put an arrangement in place that we can identify issues that are ongoing, issues perhaps where the councils or the clerks have misunderstood requirements or getting things wrong, and try and nip any potential issues in the bud. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do with this. And the outcomes of the public interest report suggest that these issues are quite widespread, and they're the same sort of issues that we've been flagging up in the annual report as well. So there's a need, I think, for us to look at across the piece in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Deryck. Thanks, Richard. Another question just come in now. So it seems that England are stepping back on external audits for smaller councils. Are Wales doing the reverse?
Shall I pick up on that one? Yeah, we can't comment on the English audit arrangements. That's for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government in England to determine that. We are subject to the Public Audit Wales Act, so our responsibilities are defined by Welsh legislation. Why are we seem to be doing the reverse of what's happening in England? I think from the evidence we've compiled through our annual reports, through our internal audit study, through the public interest reports, suggests actually there is a need for a change to the audit arrangements in Wales, and we are trying to address those specific issues that we've identified in Wales. We can't answer for what's happening in England, but I think there is a clear need for something to be done differently in Wales.
If I can add to that as well, Bethan, if possible.
Yeah, of course.
A slightly related issue, I suppose, is some of the work that the Redmond review was recently identified. And again, we can share the links to this after the event. But that's looking at some of the audits of councils in England and other sectors. And again, that's looking at changing some of the timeframes and some of the way the work's undertaken. Doesn't apply to Wales, but I think as Audit Wales, we're quite keen to watch that space and play a part in that. And coming back to the question, again, we'll obviously be, although we don't influence England, we will be watching, see what happens there. Is there any lessons for us in taking this forward as well?
Brilliant, thank you both. Moving on to the next question then, and Deryck, I'll come to you if that's okay. So how will the arrangements work in practice?
Okay, so this, I suppose, is the key messages to get across for today. So the new approach, first of all, is going to be applied to all councils, from the very smallest up to almost the largest. Llanelli Rural being the largest, will have a slightly different audit arrangement because of the size of the council. It's going to apply from the current financial year 2021 onwards, so the audit of the 2021 accounts. Number of things will be similar. The annual return, we're still going to have the annual return required by proper practice. We'll still be given a limited assurance audit opinion and undertaking limited procedure audits for 2 out of 3 years. That bit's important because if we do a full international auditing standard compliant audit, the amount of work involved increases considerably. So we're trying to make sure that the audit process is proportionate to the size of councils. A couple of things are changing. First thing, the auditors. It'll now be done by Audit Wales directly rather than through the two firms BDO and Grant Thornton. And the other critical difference is the cyclical transaction testing. I'll come on to what that means in a moment. If I can very briefly, though, give an indication of how we're going to introduce the new arrangements. We're going to stagger the transaction testing over 3 years, so 2021, 21-22 and 22-23. We're dividing every council into one of 3 groups. Group A will have transaction testing in 2021, Group B in 21 and 22, and Group C in 22-23. And we'll be publishing a schedule shortly of all the councils, what group we've allocated them to. So you've got an idea of when the new procedures will apply to you. When you're not having a detailed transaction-based audit, the audit procedures will be very similar to the ones that we're using in the current audit arrangements. You should see very little difference other than where you're sending the annual returns to if you're not having the transaction testing. So I'll talk about the limited procedures. They're very similar to the current arrangements. One change to the annual return will be we've agreed with One Voice Wales and SLCC to remove part 2 of the governance statement. So we'll simplify the annual return slightly. There's limited testing to validate the accounts and the annual governance statement assurances, and we will continue to notify councils in advance of the governance statement assertions that will be reviewed. So we aim to do that in our annual reports going forward, and we aim to do that by the end of the year immediately prior to the year of account. So for 22-23, we'll be notifying you by the end of 2021, calendar year 2021. One thing to note about the limited procedures audit, that we can do additional testing as and when required if we identify a particular need to, and that's no different to the current arrangements. In terms of the transaction testing, this is once every 3 years. We'll still apply the limited audit procedures, but with some additional testing of transactions. And that testing is going to be around agreeing the accounts to the underlying accounting records, the cash book, the ledger. Verification of closing balances through the bank reconciliation to bank statements, etc., and verification of transactions to underlying or third-party records. Now, those things are for receipts. We'll be looking to confirm things like precepts to information held by unitary authorities. If you're receiving grants, we're looking at grant approvals. If you're a burial authority, we look at burial records. We look at VAT returns, etc. For payments, we'll want to see invoices, receipts. We'll need to understand the payment authorization process at each council, and then we'll be looking to see if that process has been followed. So if the payments are to be authorized at council meetings, we'll be looking to examine council minutes. We'll be looking for compliance with standing orders, financial regulations. For staff costs, we'll be looking to confirm salaries to contracts, confirm that appropriate tax and NI has been deducted, and any additional payments for home office allowances, for overtime, those sort of things have been through a proper authorization process. Very much what we're going to be focusing on in terms of the transactions is the operation of the council's internal controls and how effective those are. So that's a very brief summary of what the process will be. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, lots of questions coming in now.
Okay.
So I will go to this one that's come through first. So how is it anticipated that the proposed new audit regime will enable poor practices and financial control to be picked up at an earlier stage than at present?
Okay, shall I pick that up? We're going to be undertaking more detailed audit testing at every authority across a 3-year period. What we are aiming for is that if any poor practices exist or creep in, we'll be able to pick those up within 3 years. When we looked at the councils where we've issued public interest reports, we found that problems have been ongoing for many years. So if we can pick up every council once every 3 years. We should hopefully keep a lid on problems escalating.
Great, thanks, Deryck. The next question that's come in, how will you undertake the viewing of full working papers? Will it involve attending council sites?
So our thinking is that we will identify a central site for audit work to be undertaken. We'll ask councils to come into a local site, drop off their records. There are some records that we will be essential for us to have. Those are things like cash book, bank statements, checkbooks that are including those that are in use, files of invoices, minutes and reports to council. Hopefully we'd identify as many of those as possible from the council's websites. We'll need to have copies of burial records. Where we ask for records that you need to continue using, things like the burial records, the checkbook, the cash book, we'll copy those and return them to you promptly. So the idea is you come to a local office, you drop off your records, we do our audit work, and then we return them to you a short time later. So it won't be sending all your records into Cardiff, it'll be attending a local office. We need to work out how that is going to work out in practice, whether we ask you to come into Unity Authority offices, one of our regional offices, and we're also thinking about some of the larger town and community councils, if we can use their offices to meet the clerks with the records.
Brilliant, thanks, Deryck. Now we've got two here that are quite similar, so I'll read them both out anyway. So the transactional work to be undertaken sounds exactly the same as the existing thorough internal auditors are carrying out. Why duplicate this? And the second question, it's very similar. Does the transaction testing not duplicate internal audit work?
Okay, I think this comes back to the findings in our internal audit study. We have identified that in some cases, councils don't have internal audits. The work that we are proposing to undertake will be broadly similar to, in some senses, to the work that internal audit undertake. But what we find in many cases that actually the evidence presented to us at audit, where we've undertaken more detailed work, it doesn't. The evidence that we have available doesn't substantiate the assurances provided by internal auditors in many cases. So I don't think it's possible for us to rely exclusively on the work undertaken by internal audit based on the evidence that we have available.
That's great. Thank you, Deryck. As I say, the questions are flying in now. Thanks everyone for sending them all through. So the next question then, will detailed work be on a 3-year cycle or at random intervals, i.e. not every 3rd year?
Okay, it'll be on a 3-year cycle. That will be starting for 2021 accounts. So Group A will have a transaction-based audit in 2021, and for the following 2 years, the limited procedures. Group B will follow a year later. It's going to be on a strict 3-year cycle. That's our plans at the moment, but with the proviso that if we have concerns arising from the limited procedures, we will undertake more targeted work at those councils. If we undertake a transaction type audit at a council in year 1, if there are significant issues arising, we may undertake the same process in year 2 as well. But that will be in relation to an identified risk or problem at an individual council. We won't be doing any random additional work in the intervening years.
Great, thanks, Deryck. Next question then, will there be an assessment of how closely a council's budget maps its spending, forecast as against actual?
That's not part of our current thinking. We're looking more at our responsibilities under the Act to give an opinion on the accounts and to consider whether or not the council has proper arrangements in to secure value for money. Budget setting monitoring is an important part of financial management, which helps you to deliver both of those elements. We're not planning on specifically looking at outturn versus budget at the moment, but it's something we may look at if we identify significant issues at a council.
Great, thank you, Deryck. Next question then again. So are your groups A, B and C the same regime as the Independent Remuneration Panel for Wales?
No, we're dividing the councils into basically what we're trying to do is manage the work programme across a 3-year period. We have, in terms of identifying the councils into A, B and C, we have identified 3 regions across Wales that match how we deliver our normal audit functions. We've then ranked the councils by size of income and expenditure from top to bottom. The first one is in Group A, the second one in Group B, the third one in Group C, and then we start again until we get down to the bottom of the list. And the idea of that is we get a balanced work programme of councils where we are looking at detailed testing in year 1 and then the limited procedures in year 1 as well. So it's about managing the programme. It's not necessarily anything to do with the size of the council, which is where I get in every council. Each group will have a range of councils from the large to smallest.
Thanks, Deryck. Next question then, more sort of practical side. I'm assuming this is in relation to the working papers side of things. So can information be provided digitally rather than paper?
Yes, we'll need to have a think about how we transfer data. We do use a secure data transfer package at the moment called Objective Connect, and we will be able to use that for transfer of data. One thing I would ask for in terms of if you're using an Excel spreadsheet or an accounts package for your cash book, we'd rather have electronic data on that. Sometimes we've had printed copies supplied, and it's almost impossible to read some of the entries in there. So if we can have digital information provided, that's great.
Lovely, thank you. We're having a lot of questions in relation to sort of fees and that kind of thing. I'll save them for later on because we will come on to that a bit later. So let's have a look. The next one then is sort of looking at internal audit. So is there a plan for an internal audit work programme for the internal audit? Seems a very simple thing to do. At the moment, I imagine too many internal auditors do not have audit background, never mind an understanding of CC, financial regs, etc. I also imagine there is a lot of conversational auditing going on.
Okay, I'll give a very brief answer to that if I may, and then I'll hand over to Paul, because I know Paul does some internal audit work himself. There is a guidance on internal audit in the practitioner's guide that's published by One Voice Wales and Society of Local Council Clerks. So any internal auditors who've got concerns about what work they should be doing, I'd recommend they refer to the practitioner's guide in the first instance. Paul, if you want to add anything to that?
Okay. Well, I wanted to make a few comments about the process that Deryck has described. First of all, I wanted to take you back some years. When I first started as a clerk, I keep telling people this all the time now, I'm getting proud of it. 37 years I've been a clerk. And when I first started, I had to take a box of documents every year to a central location in the Vale of Glamorgan, where I'm based as a clerk. And I'd leave them there for a couple of days. Then I'd be called back for a discussion with the auditors. And I found that process, I have to say, extremely helpful, because it gave me a lot of confidence that what I was doing was either right or needed some adjustment. And it also gave me some recommendations for how I could change things for the future, which would make the council more compliant. So I didn't really have a problem with it. Sometimes, though, it was difficult to get there because I had a busy full-time job as well as a part-time clerk. So what I used to do was arrive extremely early and leave my documents with, it was a town council office. So I left them there, rushed off then to Cardiff where I was working full-time. And I was able to meet the auditors at an agreed time towards the end of a working day. So I managed to fit it in. And don't forget, in those days, 735 clerks were doing all the same, taking all their documents for a full audit in those days, undertaken by the Wales Audit Office. I think that that process can give greater assurance to all councils that things are either in good order or there are weaknesses or improvements needed. So I think it gives greater assurance. It will enhance the knowledge of the RFO, who's often the clerk as well. And I think the survey that I'm aware that Audit Wales took on this revised audit regime actually produced the majority of councils who responded were in favour of this change of approach. I can't comment on the fees. That's something One Voice Wales adopts a reserve position because we don't really want our councils paying more for audit, but I won't say anything more on that, but I'm not giving any support to that. But I do think that this process will help nip issues in the bud before they become highly problematic. So what are we doing to help and support councils? Well, we're offering webinar training at the moment, and two of the modules, one's on local government finance basics, and one is on the advanced side of things. That describes the audit process in quite a lot of detail. It's primarily designed for councillors because it's our view that councillors should have a pretty good handle on what is involved in relation to effective financial accounting and management, and also about the internal audit process and what that will produce in terms of benefits for each council. Now, at the moment, with Welsh Government funding, we are being given a few free places which we can allocate out to councils, and there's been so far, I'd say, a reasonable take-up. I expected there to be 100% take-up. It's free training. You can come in on the webinar from your home, and you can pick up a lot of information about what's happening in relation to financial issues concerning your council. And the other thing that we're planning to do is to design, as we've done previously, an audit timetable. These are all the events during the year when an RFO will need to be doing things for the council and to comply with those aspects of the regulations. And it's a kind of ready reckoning. You can put it on your notice board and look at that, and you've got the plan really of things you need to achieve each year. I think everyone found it helpful last time, and I'll be working with Deryck Evans to get an updated version out to you, hopefully prior to the start of the financial year. I don't think I need to say any more at this stage.
Lovely, thanks, Paul. So just on that, Deryck, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything about sort of what the benefits of the changes will be to that, or is Paul kind of covered everything there?
Yeah, from our perspective, I think from Audit Wales' perspective, I think the new arrangements will make sure that we can deliver the Auditor General's statutory duties, and that's our primary concern really in developing the audit arrangements. I think councils will benefit as well. The new arrangements will assist councils to ensure they've got good standards for financial management in place, and that any incorrect practices are picked up and resolved at an early stage. One of the benefits of the new arrangements is for when we're undertaking the limited procedures audit, the audit fees shouldn't be any higher than they are currently. So we're looking at broadly comparable fees to the current arrangements. One of the costs of the new arrangement is that where we're undertaking transaction-based audits, the fees will be a little bit higher. We are currently consulting on fee scales, so I would ask delegates to refer to that consultation and respond to that. There's nothing we can do to avoid that. We're designing arrangements that are and audit tools for our staff that will help us to make the process as efficient as possible. But council's got a part to play there in terms of providing information to auditors when it's requested, and make sure that the records are kept up to date and accurate. The other benefit of the new arrangement as well is for the public, where they'll have greater assurance over community and town council accounts than they would get from the current audit arrangements.
Great, thank you, Deryck. I'm sorry, had you finished there? Were you going to say more?
No, that's all right.
No, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So I'm just going to remind everyone, obviously, as I say, lots of questions coming in now, but just a reminder for anyone that might have joined late, how you can send your questions in. So you can email your questions to good.practice@audit.wales. You can use the Q&A function on Zoom, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen, Or if you use Twitter, you can send us a tweet via the hashtag, which is hashtag AWFutureAudit, or you can send us a direct message to @AuditWales_GPX. So moving on to the next question, because I know we've had a lot of questions coming in on this. Will there be any changes to fees? I think, Richard, are you coming in on this one? Or Deryck, sorry?
I'll hand that one to Richard for me.
Thanks, Bethan. Thanks, Deryck. And I think, thanks both. I'm up to come in on this, and I think Deryck's touched on sort of probably a lot of it already, really. I think what we're looking to do, it is a 3-year cycle of work. The 2 years where you do the normal cycle of work will be no higher than you've been paying for fees. The 3rd year, as Deryck's touched on, the transactional based audit will be more work. So therefore the fees will be slightly higher. The fee scales are coming out for consultation now, so hopefully you've all had access and sight of those. Again, after this session, Beth, it'd be good to share the links to that, because that's live at the moment. And again, we are conscious there is extra cost and fees for yourselves. I think the key for us is making sure you're aware of those early. And I think some of the chat and the questions about when we can sort of notify you of that. And again, Deryck's touched on, hopefully later this month and during November now, you'll have an idea which groups you are in and the fee associated with the work that's required this year. So as part of your budgeting round, you can sort of pick up those issues, talk to about the precept and how you sort of recover some of those costs. But as I say, Deryck's touched on the Audit Wales, we do have to recover our costs. There will be more work involved. What we're hoping, I suppose, going forward is the reactive work we've had and the lots of extra costs, some of the bodies will be avoided. And I quite like some of the flow of the questions about internal audit and how they perform their work and where it works well, how we can use that. And that's something we will obviously consider. We wouldn't want to duplicate a lot of the internal audit work. I think, again, it's been touched on, some of that work probably hasn't been sufficient in the past and probably come to the different conclusions to ourselves when we looked at the work. But there's something there for me in terms of how this regime is sort of refined over the next couple of years. We can take on board and look at. We're not just going to do it and stop. We will be looking for feedback after year 1, after year 2, after year 3, with a view to see where it takes us. I think Paul and Deryck have talked about the benefits of this. I fully support that, but we can't be oblivious to the fact there's more cost in the system as well, and that's something we'll keep looking at, keep trying to work through, where the technology and delivery models help us work through that process. We're all learning all the time about what COVID means for us and how we do work and how some of the digital access things work better. That's something we got to consider with yourselves in the sector as well, to be honest. So I'll stop there. I'm conscious probably a lot more questions on fees, but we'll try our best to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So there's one here, it's sort of comment and question. Which you might have already touched on. Will there be a published list or timetable of which councils will receive the more detailed audit in which year? There will be a significant difference in cost for these, and councils should be given the opportunity to budget for this. They can only do so if they know beforehand, and in reality, by about November in the year before the in-depth audit.
Yeah, I'll come in first there from Bethan, and Deryck will probably mop up in a way. But yes, definitely. I think we're looking to get something out this month, Deryck, so you're aware of what those issues are going to be. I think that'll tell you what group you're in and the proposed fees for the 2021 audit. Anything else, Deryck?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've done the analysis. We've got the schedule. We just need to format the list, and then we can publish it. We're thinking of putting it on our website if we can, but we certainly get it out to all councils as soon as possible.
Great, thank you both. Another question here. So would it be possible for you to spread the extra audit costs over the 3-year period, resulting in a slightly higher annual audit fee rather than a particularly high fee every 3rd year?
Do you want me to pick that one up, Richard? At the moment, because of the way the legislation is structured, that's not possible. We have to. We can't charge an audit fee that's higher than the cost of delivering the audit in any one year. So we couldn't charge a higher fee for 2021 in order to spread the cost over 21, 22, 22, 23, and 23, 24. It's not possible for us to do that under the current legislation. So unfortunately, it will mean that you'll have 1 year in 3, you'll have a bit of a bounce in the audit fees. So hopefully by us giving you the schedule of when each council will be subject to the the transaction-based reviews, then that will help you to budget for that. Okay.
Lovely, thanks, Deryck. So another question here. So we're already setting budgets for 21-22. Is it possible to give councils a ballpark cost of audits and which group they'll be in so they can set appropriate budgets ahead?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, Deryck.
Yeah, that'll be linking together the schedule of the councils and which group they're in, and then linking that up to the fees consultation. So that won't be a problem.
Great, thank you. So another question here. Sorry, so just a little bit of clarification. I think a couple of people have asked this, I can see. So can you clarify if the first year is 2021 or 21-22, please?
2021. Audit of the 2021 accounts, which will be undertaken in the summer of 2021, is the first year.
Lovely, thank you. I know a few people. I can see there's a few questions on that here. Okay, so there's another one here. Should councils fail to submit annual returns on time, would Audit Wales contact the council's chairperson or mayor in order to take action?
This is what happens normally. The normal process is the auditors will chase the clerk for the annual return. If the clerk doesn't respond, they then seek to identify the chair. And if that still doesn't elicit a response, the auditors currently then pass on to Audit Wales for follow-up. That process will continue. We will review how we go about communicating with councils, but it's certainly that's currently part of the arrangement, and that will continue to be the case going forward.
Thank you, Deryck. Just one more question on this and before we move on to the next part. So when will councils be notified of their groups?
By the end of this month.
Brilliant. There we go. That was easy. Thank you. Okay, so as I said earlier, I'm conscious that there is an awful lot of questions coming through. Anything we don't answer today, we will make sure we come back to later this week. And what we'll do is we will send an email out to you all just with those responses on. Okay, so moving on to the next question then. How can councils prepare for the new arrangements? I'm not sure who wants to go first, whether Paul or Richard. Can I come to one of you?
Well, my response to that question would be, you all have an internal audit function, and I'm a clerk still, I still do the job. We prepare our accounts in accordance with the timetable, and I'm assuming that every clerk in Wales will get their documents together in the right order, in a logical fashion, to take to their internal auditor, because an internal auditor couldn't undertake the function very well if the documents aren't provided in the required format. I think that if clerks are feeling that they're not quite sure what that order would be, then I'm thinking here at the moment, the help we could provide in One Voice Wales would be when we publish this audit timetable, I think it might be handy if we put some guidance about how you put your documents together. I don't know whether the large councils will need that kind of advice, but many of the small ones would, especially if there's a clerk there who's only just started, just before the end of the financial year, or maybe even a couple of councillors trying to cover for a clerk that's left before the end of the financial year. So I think that's something that I might well try to do, obviously in consultation with Audit Wales, because I think for some new clerks, that is a bit of a struggle, knowing how to put things together ready for an audit process. So I'll flag that up as an issue for One Voice Wales, and I'm committed to taking that forward.
Thanks, Paul. Richard, do you want to come in on that as well?
I would just echo that as well, Bethan. I think it's understanding the requirements, both in terms of producing the accounts for internal audit and for Audit Wales. And again, we can share information in terms of what the transactional work is around and about, but having those records ready, which we can then quickly work through and see how internal audit done with those records as well. I think Deryck's touched on what the transactional audit's about at a high level. We can share some of that thinking outside this forum as well, Bethan, so people are armed with that, because we're not trying to catch people out. We want this to work smooth and give people the assurance that they do things properly. So anything we can do to help that, again, we'd be more than happy to support through Paul or with Paul.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard.
Can I just add one comment, Bethan, to that?
Yeah.
In essence, in an ideal world, preparation for the audit, there should be almost nothing required. You'd have prepared the accounts. You'd have gone through that process. You'll have your cash book or ledger up to date. You'll have your file of supporting invoices, etc. And as far as the audit process goes, you just hand those over to the auditor to get on with. That's in an ideal world. I appreciate that, but in theory, there shouldn't be any additional work required on councils to prepare for this new arrangement.
Thanks, Deryck. Interesting question here, actually, we've had through. So what happens if you are a clerk to more than one council and by chance get all in one group for a detailed audit? I'm not sure if anyone wants to come in on that one. Paul?
Yeah, I think the point I made earlier, I think new clerks need help and support. Okay, I take that on board, and I will definitely do that. But I think for clerks who know the business, whether they're a clerk of 1 or 3 or 4 councils, for each one of those, they would have to provide their accounts, their cash book, and the supporting documents for internal audit. So they're doing it anyway. If an internal auditor, and I do some internal audit work myself, if I was given documents that weren't in the right format, weren't put together, I wouldn't do the audit until they were. So I would say probably you're getting stuff ready anyway for the internal audit. It's not any more significant a workload issue than just presenting them in the same way you present them to the internal auditor.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. Next question then. So what information will I need to provide for the transaction audit?
I'll pick this up. We've covered this earlier on. We're looking at basically we'll have the annual return anyway, because those are the annual accounts, and then we'll basically be looking for the records that support the entries in those accounts. So it'll be the cash book or the ledger, supporting invoices, receipts, payroll information, etc. So it's that kind of stuff. But we will provide a schedule of information to councils when we send out the audit notices. We'll explain to them exactly what it is they need to provide for the purpose of the audit. So councils will be reminded of that every year. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Deryck. Could there be some good practice templates as part of the guidance? This could help assessment on a like-for-like basis. Not sure if anyone want to come in on that one.
Not quite sure what the question is really getting at, but if it's about giving guidance on how you put together your documents so that you can take them to audit and auditors can look at them and not sort of I'd send them back to you and ask you to present them in a different way. Yes, I can certainly do that, and that's part of our role in One Voice Wales to support member councils in that way. But I'm not quite sure what the questioner had in mind though beyond that, because everything you need to know is in the Practitioner's Guide to Governance and Accountability. It's a very, very big read, not far short of 200 pages, but you don't have to read it all at once. When you're doing the budgets, for example, read the section on budgeting. It's really good. It's easy to understand, and it gives you lots of good information about how to present things, how to put things together. I think that's probably the starting point. Your good practice is there already.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Paul. And is there somewhere that can we share that with everyone listening today?
The Practitioner's Guide is published by One Voice Wales and SLCC, so you can obtain a copy from those two organisations.
Great, thanks both. Another question here that's come in then, will we need to carry out an internal audit if we are having a detailed transaction audit by Audit Wales that year, or can we save on these fees every third year?
If I can come in there, the simple answer is yes. The requirement to have an adequate and effective internal audit is set out in the Accounts and Audit regulations. So every council is required to have an internal audit every year. Now, what the council should be doing, and again, there's guidance in the practitioner's guide on this, is agreeing with the internal auditor the scope of their audit and what assurance they expect to receive from the internal auditor. It's up to the council to agree that scope and the work involved. But the core basic answer is yes, you do still need an internal audit each year.
Thanks, Deryck. I'm just conscious of time now, so we'll move on to the next section now. Hopefully we'll still have some time for questions at the end. So the next question for Paul and Deryck was, how will councils be supported? And Paul, do you want to come in first on that one?
Well, we're running 2 courses, as I said earlier on. We run a whole 23 modules of different courses, but the 2 in particular, Basic Finance and Advanced Finance, they're primarily designed for councillors, but we have had some new clerks coming in on recently, and I think they found them really helpful, particularly the Advanced Finance one. So that support will always be there. We'll even provide the course for the whole of the council. So if one council came to us and said, can you train all of us, Paul? The answer to the question is yes. It may not be me, but it might be one of my trainers. And there's a reduced fee for a whole council training session. So that's one thing we can do. We provide a daily advisory service to all councils in Wales. And I can tell you that around about audit time or the end of the financial year, we're pretty much inundated with requests for advice. And we welcome that because that's part of our role, is to provide advice. And we welcome those inquiries so that we can help clerks understand the issues they're confronting. Maybe fairly simple ones to us. To them, they may be very difficult. But we have that advisory service on the go all the time. And as I said, the annual timetable of events I will be putting together, and also a guide to getting your accounts ready for audit. And I think clerks will find that really helpful. Over and out.
Thanks, Paul. That's great.
Yep.
Thank you. Deryck, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, from our perspective, I'm happy to attend local meetings of SLCC, One Voice Wales area meetings, etc., and talk about the arrangements. And my perspective on how preparations can be made. Like I said, I don't think there's an awful lot will need to be undertaken by clerks for the transaction audits. It's simply a matter of gathering the records that you've already got and getting those into one place for the auditors to examine.
Lovely. Thanks, Deryck. So just a reminder again, then we've got 10 minutes left, but if there is anyone's got any questions they wanted to ask, keep sending those through. We've got another one come through here. So will you issue any more public interest reports? Deryck, can I
Yeah,
hand that
sure.
one to you?
As Richard mentioned earlier on, we've got a number of councils that we've been looking at in some detail. Some of those councils have significant issues, and therefore the Auditor General will exercise his statutory function to consider, or duty to consider, whether or not a report should be issued in the public interest. It's not something that we do lightly. We do give careful consideration to the circumstances of each council, to the issues that we've identified. So in the very short term, you may well see some more public interest reports being published. I can't say whether there will or won't be, because ultimately that's the Auditor General's decision to make. There are a number of significant issues that we are looking at. Going forward, once the new arrangements kick in, we may get some additional reports in the first sort of 3 years as we identify or potentially identify problems that have been in place for some time now. but I would hope that as this arrangement progresses, the number of councils that we would consider to have significant failings, I'd expect those numbers to reduce, and the public interest reports become rarer than they are at the moment.
Okay, Richard, do you want to come in as well? Yeah,
yeah, and again, it's just what Deryck's saying. We don't do public interest lightly. We don't really. That's not a tool we'd like to use. It's very rare in other sectors those reports are produced. But I suppose it's showing probably the regime where I started probably hasn't quite worked to get to those stages. And then we can do more proactively to support, to help. Okay, we've got to hold into account as well, obviously. But we want this to be a better process for everybody involved and more assurance to the wider public out there. Public interest are almost the last resort, and if we've got to produce lots of those, something's not quite working. So I think Deryck's right. With the new regime coming through, we'd hope that starts addressing these issues earlier and moves the whole sector forward.
Thanks, Richard. That's great. Just again, another question here coming back to the groupings. So what criteria are you using for assessing what group councils are in? Are the weakest ones going first?
I'll answer that one. Primarily, it's based on geography and size. So we've got 3 areas: North Wales, West Wales, South and Mid Wales being Powys and Swansea across to Monmouthshire. We've ranked the councils in terms of income and expenditure, highest to lowest, and we've picked every third one into Group A. So it's largest one, the 4th, the 7th, etc., is in Group A. We are going to have a look at that just where we've received some information in relation to specific councils, and we might want to pick up 1 or 2 councils and just move them around slightly. But generally, it's about geography and size. We pick up any issues with audits, then where we have identified problems at audit, we will undertake additional work if required.
Brilliant. Thanks, Deryck. Last couple of questions then. So once the new external audit arrangement has settled in, what action will be taken against those councils continuing to fail to comply? Does anyone want to look at you again? Deryck, did you want to come in on that one?
Action to councils failing to comply. We have a broad range of powers to enforce compliance, if you like. Obviously, we want we want a spirit of cooperation between the auditors and the councils. There is an obligation for the councils to prepare accounts and to submit those accounts for audit. We'd expect the vast majority of councils to comply with that, in the spirit we intend it to apply. Where councils are unwilling to comply with the information we need to undertake the audit, we have a statutory right of access to that information, and there are penalties for councils or individuals rather, who fail to comply with requests for information or requests to attend the audit. We don't want to go down that route. We'd rather deal with councils. If the information comes in immediately, that's great. If there are problems, we'd rather talk to clerks, to councils, and find out what the problems are and find a solution to any difficulties that we're encountering. We don't want to get heavy-handed, and that's not the way we want to do things. We don't get as good a response if we go in kicking and screaming, as it were. So, in terms of if councils fail to comply, we've got the option of enforcement in terms of access to information. We'll also then consider whether we need to make statutory recommendations or public interest reports to draw attention to failures to comply. So very much what we've been doing over the last few years. Those rights of access, etc., haven't changed. But hopefully we'll get things will work well.
Brilliant, thanks, Deryck. I've noticed a few new clerks on the call today. So this is more of a comment more than a question, but a detailed process map for the audit would ensure councils are all working at the standard required. As a new clerk, I would find it very useful. So is that something that's available to councils?
I'm not quite sure what that's getting at. The practitioner's guide is available to all, and as Paul mentioned, that should include all the information you need to provide complete the accounts and provide the accounts, etc., for audit. It will need to be updated to reflect the new approach, but I expect that will be completed by the end of, but certainly by the end of 2021. Yeah, so I'd urge clerks to refer to the practitioner's guide in the first instance. If you're uncertain, then by all means, I'm sure Paul will echo this as well, contact One Voice Wales for advice on where to go if you're not sure about any particular aspect of the accounts or audit process.
I think it would also be useful if any clerks feel they need to have their base knowledge increase in a short space of time, signing into some of our training programs. There's a fee involved for clerks. It's not very much, but you can pick up a lot in an hour and a half, and it's one good way of helping direct what you still need to learn, but also a huge way of making sure you fill those holes in before you fall in them. And I think training is ideal for that. So we do get a lot of clerks attending. New clerks, I think experienced ones don't need to, but new clerks, they might find it quite useful to go to those courses.
Thanks, Paul. I'll just squeeze this very last question in because, again, it's for another new clerk. I'm new to the post and only know of our existing internal auditor. Is there a list of recommended internal auditors so I can compare fees? Does anything like that exist?
Audit Wales don't recommend internal auditors for independence reasons. It would compromise our independence if we were to provide a list of approved auditors. There is, as I said, there's guidance in the practitioner's guide. I'm not sure if One Voice Wales has any further information on internal audit. Paul, perhaps if you could clarify if there is anything further.
I think that we're also in a difficult position about recommending internal auditors because we may well have a conflict of interest as well. I'd like to flag that one up as an issue to take back to our regular team meetings to see if there's something we could do to maybe find out who's doing audits at the moment, where hopefully we can check out effectiveness and so on. I don't know how we do that, but I'll think about it. Whether we could have a list or maybe even an application process for internal auditors to put forward their credentials, but we can't recommend anyone to provide a service. That would be against our principles of operation.
Thanks, Paul. So perhaps that's something we can follow up when we respond to the questions we haven't got round to asking today. So I'm just conscious of the time. We are out of time now. So in terms of next steps, just to let you know that today's webinar has been recorded. So for anyone that didn't have time to listen in or wants to listen back again, the recording will be available in sort of a week or two's time on our YouTube channel. So what we'll do now, we'll take the video down. It has to be transcribed and translated, and we'll send you a link to that recording when it's available. As I say, you're free to share that with colleagues that haven't been able to attend today and use as part of resources to support your councils. Sorry, Paul, did you want to?
Can I just quickly respond to Margaret from Landferris, because it was on the back of the last question. I think Margaret was asking for, is there a schedule of what auditors do? Well, if you come on one of our training courses or email me direct, I'll send you scope for audit. So it does indicate what internal auditors should do for you. That answers Margaret's question there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. So I'd just like to say then finally a big thank you to our panel today, to Richard, Deryck and Paul. Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And also a big thank you to everyone listening in today. We say this time and time again, but these sessions wouldn't work without your input. So thank you. It's been really good to hear all your questions and your thoughts. And please, if there is anything you haven't asked today, if you go away from today's session and there's still something you're not sure of, send it through to us through the channels we've mentioned, and we'll make sure we can get back to you on that one. Just one final thing just before we leave, and that is, I just wanted to mention feedback. So as you leave the session today, you'll be directed to a really short feedback survey. We'd just really like to hear your thoughts on today's session. You know, with things the way they are at the moment, we're currently increasingly delivering events online, so any feedback you have is really valuable to us. So I'm going to sign off for today then. Thank you very much again to everyone, and we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Can you hear me, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're
What
not
do you
going
think?
to reflect on it, are we?
No, I'll catch up. We'll arrange something to catch up on the reflection. So we'll be in touch.
Yeah. So all
shortly.
the participants are out of the session now, are they?
Yeah, we'll pick up. Not yet. We'll pick up on that shortly. So yeah. All right. We'll be in touch, Paul.
Okay, fine. Cheers.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cheers, Paul. Bye.
Bye.